All right, so now that you've learned all the core concepts of React as well as the context API, now it's time to start learning Redux. And Redux is a state manager. It gives us the ability to have application level state. Now, this shouldn't be a foreign concept to you because you've already dealt with this with the context API, which does just that. And you can see how helpful it is to have all your state in one place and to be able to access it through all your components. Now, some people seem to think that the context API is going to make Redux and other state managers obsolete. I think it's a minority of developers that think that, and I think that they really might not have that much experience with bigger applications, because context is great for small applications where you don't have too many resources, like the one we built. It only had a contacts resource. But let's say it's an e-commerce website where you have products, categories, customers, authentication. To use the context API for something like that seems very difficult to me. Redux, on the other hand, was created for stuff like that. You simply create a reducer for each resource along with an action file for each resource to manipulate the state inside the store. Now, you could pull it off with context, but I think that you'd run into issues trying to replicate what Redux already does. I think there'd be a lot of extra coding and just complexity. Now, this is just my opinion. If you ask 100 developers, you're going to get 100 different answers. So once you learn both the context API and Redux, you can decide what to use for what applications. Now, the biggest downside to Redux, in my opinion, and most people's from what I can see, is the boilerplate and setup. There's a lot that goes into it. Not only that, but it also every developer structures Redux differently, which makes it a little confusing as well when you're starting to learn it. You got to kind of get adapt your own way of implementing it. Redux consists of a store to hold your global state. Then you have reducers, which are basically functions that manipulate that state and in some way, and then it will trickle down into your components, the components that need it. And just like with context and regular components, state is immutable, so we'll be using things like the spread operator quite a bit to take the initial state and basically make a copy of it and then return that. In addition to reducers, you have actions which make calls to the reducer. So for instance, adding a client, deleting a client, these are actions. And you create something called an action creator, which returns the action to the reducer along with a payload if needed. So you're going to see a lot of similarities between Redux and the context API. Redux is just a bit more in depth. Now, if you feel overwhelmed with understanding how Redux works, you're definitely not alone, okay? If you have trouble with the terminology and stuff like that, I felt the same exact way, and I also find it pretty hard to teach. It's a very simple concept. It's top-down, immutable application level state, but the terminology, the boilerplate setup, it makes it very difficult to grasp it at first. So I'll do my best to be able to convey the concepts clearly, but once you start working with it more and more, it just becomes clear, and you can also see the major benefits of using it. So in the next video, we're going to take the project that we've been working on, the contact manager, and we're going to take a starting point without the context API, and then we're going to implement Redux to it. All right, so I will see you then.